On the topic that I know has been a topic of concern for a lot of folks, and it's about out-migration, gentrification, economic development in North Omaha. And, you know, there's some important principles around this. I gave you the clip notes on the table because we're going to cover a lot of slides. I got 48 slides. We're not going to cover them all. Well, we might, but we'll be here late. But also, before I even get started, I give you permission if you have to leave at 1 to just get up and go. Don't feel like you have to stay until we're done, because I'm pretty sure we're going to run over, whether it's due to questions or just the content of the presentation. So I know when we were here last week with Brother Yusuf, you did an excellent job, phenomenal job. If you haven't seen that on Willie's live stream, I encourage you to check it out. You know, I know some folks that probably had to leave, but they were sitting in the front, and so they were like, oh, we don't want to leave, so they ended up waiting around. So if you have to go, just go. We'll try to post the video up somewhere, whether it's the live stream or the Facebook, for people to kind of take a look at and see it at their leisure. Also, you'll be able to get the PowerPoint. You know, later I'll figure out a way where we can post that online, or Willie can post it and you can get it, because we got a lot of information, a lot of data. Can you hear me okay? Am I good back?
Can you see, sir?
Okay, good. So the title of our topic today is North Omaha Out-Migration, Gentrification, and Economic Development. Before I get there, normally when I do these conversations, like past Hungry Clubs, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship-led development, the impact that can have on communities. So I know a lot of you who've heard me before are going to be surprised that I'm not talking about that at all, but probably I will just a little bit. So I can never get away from it. But the broader conversation we're going to have is just on traditional understanding of what's actually going on in North Omaha, so that we can make the appropriate strategic considerations to address that. So real quick, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, Federal Reserve Banks were the monetary policy institution in the nation, most powerful financial institution in the history of the world, is what I tell my daughter's class. You know, when we do things at the Federal Reserve Bank, as a central bank, it affects the global economy. And so that's important. But one of the functions that they have is my function, which is community development. So my responsibilities for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, which is one of 12, and then we have the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., is small business and economic development for our 7 states. And so that's kind of my role, and that's why we tackle topics like this and other topics of economic development, small business growth. Our three main functions are to conduct the nation's monetary policy, provide and maintain effective and efficient payment systems, and supervise and regulate banking operations. That's what we do as a nutshell. So we're a very important institution nationally, but I think personally my role, the role that our function plays, is equally as critical as the monetary policy decisions, because every day we try to think about and figure out ways that we can ensure that low to moderate income populations, distressed populations, can, you know, really participate in the economy fully. We know there's a lot of issues going on with wealth gap, with other issues that are facing intractable poverty in certain areas. So trying to think through some of those issues and how do we innovate around those is the key. But before I start, for real, the views in this presentation do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City nor the Federal Reserve Bank system. So I can now say exactly what I want to say, and you can't get me fired because I gave the disclaimer, so you got the label on it. So let me tell you a little bit more about me from a professional standpoint. Oh, before I forget, I put this slide in there in particular because this is a phenomenal woman, Big Mama. Rest in peace. I mean, for those of you who know her, she's reflective of all the things that I teach about, the ideals that I teach about and preach about in regard to community. For those of you who know, I remember going back when she was first starting the business, and we sit and talk about the business, and then she started with her tenacity, especially at an older age. And one of the things that I've always respected about her is her commitment to community, which is what happens with a lot of black entrepreneurs. See, there's something in the field now called social entrepreneurship, but black people have always been social entrepreneurs. We've always looked at what is known as the triple bottom line, but especially the double bottom line, both people and profit. It was never exclusively about profit, the majority of us. And so when you see a black business that's created, especially like Big Mamas, who made it intentional to hire ex-felons and to allow things like the Hungry Club and other events to be hosted, we really need to celebrate them, and we need to celebrate her legacy. That's a phenomenal picture. I took a picture of it so I can post it up later. And she's a phenomenal woman, somebody that we should show respect to and show our love to, her and her family. And thank you for coming and buy some food. Now, what I do professionally. professionally, what I'm most nationally known for is what is known as entrepreneurship-led development, entrepreneurship ecosystem building, which is an emerging form of economic development. In fact, BJ, Vice Chancellor, he knows not as much as I do, but he's going to learn because he's one of my PhD committee members. So he's going to be reading a lot about this lately. So this is an emerging field of practice that really started heavily in 2010. And one of the things that we did is we tried to take it to another level. So I've been at the Fed now for 8 years. Probably the whole first 4 I spent in rural communities. So I'm traveling all over the states, nations, speaking at conferences. I'm going to communities where I'm the only black person there. The entire community, not just within the room, but in the entire community. And so we go there and we did a lot of conversations on economic development. How do you revitalize rural communities? How do you leverage entrepreneurship and the talent that you have to stop the out-migration there? Because they have a lot of similar issues in terms at the high level that we have here in our Omaha community. And so then one of the things happened, because I've always talked about black business, entrepreneurship, things of that nature. But I just happened to be speaking at a national conference, U.S. SourceLink, the U.S. SourceLink conference, and this is during the time Freddie Gray in Baltimore had got killed about a week before, and then there was the riots in Baltimore. And it just so happened that 2 of the mayor's community development staff were in the room. And so I talked about inclusive networks and ecosystems, and then we came up, and they reached out to me, and then we came up and we talked for about an hour afterwards, and I kind of explained to her my theory as to why riots occur. And we also talked about how do you do different forms of development. And immediately I went back to, my boss at the time, and I said, we have to be more intentional about how we do this in urban communities, urban core communities. And hence, a lot of the work that we're doing going forward. So we wrote a lot of guides. One you might know or heard me talk about a lot lately is Black Women Businesses. How many of you know that Black women created 1 million businesses from 2002 to 2012? Raise your hand if you knew that.
Just because I read it in your post yesterday.
Well, just because you read it in my post yesterday. Right, so I'm speaking at a conference called the Frontiers of Entrepreneurship Conference 2 years ago. This was during 2 weeks ago. This is during the polar vortex, right? So I get on the plane at negative whatever it is, 8 degrees in Omaha. I get off the plane in Palm Beach, Florida at 6:55 degrees. My Uber driver is saying, yeah, man, it was real cold. I had to wear 2 shirts yesterday. I'm looking at this guy like, come on, man, you got to understand where I came from. So at this conference, it's amazing because this is a conference put on by Stanford, Duke, Yale, University of Chicago, UNC, all of these folks. And so the top leaders of their academic arms of entrepreneurship are there. And so my panel was on inclusivity and entrepreneurship. And I asked the same question of these folks that research entrepreneurship every day. Did you know that black women created 1 million businesses from 2002 to 2012? At least that. 5 of them raised their hand out of 50. This has been consistent across the 500, 600, 700 people that I've talked to on the subject. You probably get about 5 to 10% that knew this. So this is a topic that's the critical attention that we pay on. So we wrote the Grow Your Own Guide, the Youth Entrepreneurship Guide. The thing that's going to change the nation is this one, though. We're going to release this. I'm going down to South by Southwest, for those of you who know what that is. I co-wrote this with Rodney Sampson, who's from Atlanta. And he is the godfather of inclusive entrepreneurship ecosystem building, created the first black accelerator, is now launching a lot of these accelerators in historically black colleges and universities. He's bringing 1,000 kids from the HBCUs who are technologists down in the South by Southwest. And so we convened a lot of folks last year, thought leaders in the space, and we wrote this guide, which is this emerging field of practice is pretty much whites only as of now. Like you see a lot of this startup culture where they come in and they bring these high-tech businesses, leverage venture capital, all these different things, and they say this is the way to go. We do it in Omaha as well. And then there's no conversation on why is this not happening in communities of color? Why is this not happening for diverse populations? And so we wrote the guide. We're going to be releasing it at South by Southwest. Then I'll be doing a lot of outreach like I normally do. So that's the kind of stuff that I tend to do, as well as the work that I do locally from the community perspective with Black Men United. All data tells a story. Like, data tells a story. The worst thing that you ever want to do is just sit around and read numbers, right? You don't just want to pull up a data chart and just say, okay, well, 10% growth or whatever. Data always has to tell a story to make it compelling and mobilize action. And that's really what we're talking about. I mean, how many of you are from North Omaha? Raise your hand. Okay, about, what is that? half, roughly, right? How many of you have spent significant time thinking about why is North Omaha economic development in such a tragic state? A lot more, right? So in a city, and unfortunately, Omaha has, I don't know if it's the stigma or whatever, of me telling the story around the nation. So now, since I've been at the Fed, I've spoken in 18 different states, 40 different cities, national conferences, 12 people, board members, in the middle of nowhere with 500 people, the whole range. And early on, I was using Nebraska. Anybody familiar with Mr. Schultz, one of my old North teachers? He'll remember this. We were forced to read the book called A Tale of Two Cities. Anybody remember that book? I used to call this Omaha. So I go around the nation and I talk about the failure of traditional economic development, and I reference Omaha as a tale of two cities, where you can have, especially through the recession, one of the greatest or most stable economies during the whole recession, to the point where people that were on our board would literally say, if Nebraskans would turn off the news, we probably wouldn't even know that there was a recession. And this was the worst recession since the Great Recession back in the day. So during this time, I think it was always us competing with North Dakota, who had struck gold, black gold and oil, in terms of the income growth and the other things within the community. Right? So I would go around and say, okay, so Nebraska, the home of Warren Buffett, this is the only place where we can walk in a room and have 2 or 3 billionaires that are in the room, with you, right? Per capita, one of the places with a lot of millionaires relative to the rest of the population. So why in 2008 did a Pew report come out and say that Omaha had the #1 childhood poverty rate in the nation, the #3 adult child poverty rate in the nation? How does this happen? Statistically speaking, black people are 13% of the population, just like the nation. But yet, when you look at us being able to adequately participate in the economy of Omaha, there is a problem. And I argue that a lot of this is based upon two things, which is historical discrimination and segregation. I can't say that. Well, I did. I gave you the disclaimer. Bad economic development policy and strategy. And then just the lack of general consideration on how to really address these issues in spite of the fact that we're trying to be a bigger city. The UOYP, Urbanly Young Professionals, and the YP came out with a report that said the experiences of young black professionals is almost polar opposite to young white professionals. And I think that's going to be reflected in some of the data. I need to hurry up to get to the data. I got 48 slides. Now, I'm a big definitional guy. And I'm tired of debating people on what they think gentrification means. Because everybody thinks they know what gentrification is, but they don't follow the research or the definitions. And I'm like, if I'm telling you I want to bake a apple pie and you bring me oranges, the dessert that I cook is something different than what you say. And having appropriate definitions and shared understanding around the definition is important, because that's how you develop intervention, by knowing exactly what it is you're talking about when you say a word. So I got a couple definitions for you. Outmigration, to leave one region or community in order to settle in another, especially as part of a large scale and continuing movement of population. This happens all the time. Think about the great migration of blacks to the north in the early 1900s. Think about the migration of blacks into Omaha, into the southern side, into the packing plants, and then ultimately into North Omaha. So outmigration is not necessarily bad, depending on the reasons that outmigration is occurring. People tend to outmigrate for 4 reasons. They don't like it. Like, how many of you moved somewhere before because you just didn't like your neighborhood, right? Now, I live literally right up the street, 43rd and Decatur. So I really wanted to move when the prostitute next door had drunk people sleeping on the lawn in the morning. I really wanted to move. I really wanted to move when she left and the hoarder came in and she had all kinds of hoarding stuff outside. Fortunately, I've been blessed with another good neighbor now, and I don't want to move so much. But people move for a wide variety of reasons. They don't like it. One of the reasons is they can't or can no longer afford it, right? So if the cost of a lease or whatever goes up, the cost of your rent, the cost of just living in the area, they leave. There is a better opportunity. Like, how many of you have ever left a place because you got a job somewhere else or a better opportunity if you moved? Finally, they are forced out. They're forced out for whatever reason. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. And so out-migration, displacement, is a form of out-migration. Displacement is a negative form of out-migration. And Zook, Beerberg, I'm not going to say all those names, read them on the bottom. Anyway, they said that there's a couple different ways people get displaced. There's direct or physical causes. Now, I want you to picture North Omaha when I read these and see if you think this is happening. 1, formal eviction. Just raise your hand. We're going to do call and response. Raise your hand if you think this is happening. Formal eviction. All right. Informal eviction, landlord harassment. Landlord foreclosure, meaning the landlord can't pay their lease. Eminent domain, not so much yet. Natural disaster, not so much yet. Building condemnation. And that's called forced displacement. Responsive displacement means that the person is responding to the situation. Deterioration in housing quality. Neighborhood violence or disinvestments. Removing parking, utilities, etc., or utility pricing. Indirect causes. Foreclosure, condo conversion, responsive rent increase, increased taxes, loss of social networks or cultural significance of a place. We rarely think, and this is why it bugs me when people used to talk about scattered site housing as a solution when you tear down the projects or when you're trying to move poor people around people that are middle class. And they'll say, oh, well, the research shows that the outcomes for that poor person are better if you put them around middle class. And some research does indeed show that. But what they often don't talk about is the fact that most people are embedded within their social structure and they rely on that. So when you're in a community, a true community, that is an asset and a resource. And when you do scattered site housing or other forms of housing where you move people out of that place, yes, they may be around wealthier people with more amenities, but they lose something as well, which is a sense of attachment to place and culture. So then you ask, out of all those, what is gentrification? I'm glad you asked that question. It's the process of repairing and rebuilding homes and businesses in a deteriorating area, accompanied by an influx of middle class or affluent people that often results in the displacement of earlier, usually poorer residents. Now, the first time gentrification was used formally as a formal term was in 1964, and this was in London. And the term gentrification comes from gentry, which in London meant your elite, snobbery, affluent, upper class people. Gentry into gentrification. I was reading on Facebook, somebody was talking about it, and they said it means Gentile, and that's referring to white people. No. No, it started with gentry, affluence, people. And so Glass, first did that. But this is an interesting statement because we have to look at it from a lot of different lenses. Depending on the time and place, gentrification has been seen as a tool, as a goal, an outcome, an unintended consequence of revitalization in declining urban neighborhoods, which are defined by their physical deterioration, concentrations of poverty, and racial segregation of people of color. See, what we don't think of often, well, we think of it indirectly, but sometimes certain forces want to gentrify because that is the only solution they have to revitalize some certain areas. So they're looking at it from a purely economic means. They're saying, how do I maximize the utility of a specific place? They're not saying, how do people in place develop and grow and maximize the utility of place so that they can stay there and also have wealth? There's a big difference. That's why I call gentrification lazy economic development. That's why I call it that, because that's what it is. So definitions. Outmigration and gentrification are not the same. Stop trying to argue with me that they are. They are not the same. One can influence the other. Both are about population migration. You can have outmigration and displacement without gentrification. But by definition, all gentrification creates a form of outmigration by forcing displacement. Does that make sense? So for example, when I speak in rural, I remember telling them the greatest speaking experience I had in my life. It was in, I think it was Hebron, Nebraska, the home of the largest sports swing in North America. They had just redeveloped their movie theater into a digital movie theater. And they literally shot my presentation up on screen. And I'm in front of everybody, all the leaders of the city, are eating popcorn. And I said, this is such a great experience. I look like a slightly better version of Denzel. I feel like I should win an Oscar. I'm forgetting, this is a tough crowd. Tough crowd. Tough crowd. So one of the things I pointed out to them is that I said, look, your population is declining by 10% every decade. There's no way your population can survive unless you figure out ways to correct the outmigration of your kids. The only demographic groups that increased were 65 plus. So that's outmigration. And that's even a form of displacement, but that's not gentrification. Think of Detroit when the auto industry failed. People had to leave because there were just no jobs. That's outmigration. That's not gentrification. Now, there can be arguments as to what's happening in Detroit now, maybe gentrification, but historically, East St. Louis, we can go on and on. So outmigration, displacement, and gentrification are related but not the same things. And this is important because each require different economic development strategies to address. So why should we care? Like, why should we care? One, instability and harm. Both gentrification and outmigration displacement create cultural instability, reduce social capital, and often scatter economically challenged populations, making geographic-centered services and place-based economic development difficult. So if I take, let's say that we're all broken here, and I say, okay, well, I'm just going to scatter you all to the wind across the four corners of Nebraska. Well, now you just have a scattered version of poverty where you can't really help them succeed the way that we can help them succeed in place and leveraging the social capital that they already have. We take such a negative approach to poor people as if they don't have any assets or ability. But by virtue of their existence and survival, we know that they do. So, economic opportunity. It devalues the potential of the population being gentrified or losing the economic potential of the population leaving the area. Every last one of you, if we look at you purely in an abstract economic term, represents a piece of an economy, right? So to the degree in which I can get each of you to have a higher yield in the economy is to the degree the whole economy works, right? So if everybody, one in you was like economic unit number one, right? However many is, like, let's say there's 50 people in here. So that's 50 economic units. The objective should be to figure out how to take you from economic unit number one to economic unit number two, because 2 times 50 equals what? 50. No, just kidding. It equals 100. So if you're a smart developer, you're looking at the value of that person in place and figuring out how to develop them in place versus saying, let me just ship you off and move somebody who may be rich from one area into another area of the city. What does that really get you? It just moves the chairs around the ship. It doesn't really alter the course of the ship. And then finally, and this is something Omaha struggles with, is perception. There was just a report out, and I don't know how accurate it was, that says Omaha is significantly low in terms of diversity for a city its size, right? You know, we've had a lot of conversations around the creative class and all that Richard Florida stuff, which people have been critiquing over time about the diversity and issues. We know it's real. So how are we ever going to be a major metro like we want to claim that we are if we can't figure out how to address the concerns of the diverse populations that are emerging in this city? So city perception. Philadelphia Fed did a piece of research, and I'm just going to read this. Pockets of gentrification in Philadelphia appear to reinforce these patterns in several ways. First, gentrifying neighborhoods become less accessible to lower-income movers, limiting their housing search to more distressed and less central neighborhoods. Vulnerable residents who remain in these upgrading neighborhoods often face higher housing costs and are less likely to see improvements in their financial health. In addition, vulnerable residents in neighborhoods that are in more advanced stages of gentrification may even come more likely to move out of these neighborhoods. Basically, what they found is that when gentrification occurs in a neighborhood, poor people tend to move to a more poor neighborhood because that's what they can afford. And those that stay traditionally become priced out. And what I didn't point in the research is people think that people, when gentrification occurs, that people want to move. That's not the case. What people that are there, they're finally saying, thank heavens, we finally have all of these cool shops that we've been asking for 30 years before we were gentrified. We don't want to leave. We want to be able to go to Starbucks. We want to be able to go to Trader Joe's. We want to have access to healthy groceries. We want to have all of these things that we've been starved and priced out of. Now it's coming, but now I can't afford it. That's what happens. So let's get into North Omaha data. And this is going to be interesting for you. And I know I'm going to have to skip some of these, but I'm going to give you as much as I can. So, and I know you can't read that in the back, but this is more technical stuff. So I'm calling this Black Plus. So when I say Black Plus, that means everybody that self-identifies on the census is Black, and those that identify themselves as Black plus another race. Because, in our culture, we consider them Black as well. So, of the 65,000 individuals identified as Black or Black plus, 5,226, 8%, specifically identify as sub-Saharan ethnicity. So every sub-Saharan ethnicity, except for Sudanese, are considered Black in the census. Now, we know Sudanese are Black, most of them, except for the northern Sudanese. So we know technically they're our brothers, so we hang out with them like that. But we know from a census and reporting standpoint, they're not reported in those numbers. This is just clarification, and this is important because I'm going to show you in the slide next. For context, their growth rate is 68% in Omaha from 2010 to 2017, compared to an 18% growth rate for Black Omahans that I call diasporic, or what we consider your traditional African American coming up through slavery with their parents, etc. Right? And so I kind of put the chart on there of what these countries represent. For perspective, nearly all growth in Black population in the entire city of Omaha from 2010 to 2017 occurred based upon sub-Saharan African population growth and West Indian growth, which includes Haiti and Jamaica and things like that. So check this out. The total Black growth in Omaha during this period, in 2017 is a census estimate. When we get to the 2020, that's more of your formal, census data. But we'll go with it. It's the best we got. Total Black growth in the population in Omaha was 2,654. The Black Sub-Saharan and West Indian growth was 3,401. What does that tell you? Mathematically, who's my people that are thinking of this mathematically? Who's leaving?
Us.
It's really that simple. So your Africans went from the diaspora. So estimated exodus of diasporian Blacks, 747 Black people actually left, traditional Black people that we call African Americans, left the city during that time period. So what is going on with Omaha and Black people? Like, this isn't some abstract conversation around brain drain. This just isn't a conversation of all the people that say, yeah, man, I'm moving to Atlanta, or I'm moving to Houston, which is what we hear the most. This is real numbers. Remember what I said, when people leave for a reason. They leave for a reason. So let's talk about North Omaha. Most consider 68111 the heart of North Omaha. I know I do. North Omaha, Omaha's Black community, with adjacent zip codes 68111 and 68104, also all or in part of that community. Combined, for just this presentation purposes, I'm calling this North Omaha. Now, I know people have drawn it up differently and whatever, but for the most part, when people think North Omaha and you ask them to have a pen and draw a circle, they're usually doing some kind of circle around these kind of zip codes. So I put my little cute chart up there, check it out. That's where it's at. Now, this goes back to that chart. So this is the 2017 North Omaha Black plus population breakdown in 2017 versus the all Omaha Black population breakdown. So in North Omaha, the Black population was 34,000, roughly 35,000 people. The total Black population was roughly 65,000 people. But when you look at that red piece of the pie is your sub-Saharan Africans that identified as Black on the census. So what that shows you is that even though they're driving Black population growth, they're most likely not to come and live in North Omaha. So that also has consequences on what we see when we show you out-migration. This is the population migration. Remember I said out-migration. And this is the most amazing, one of the most amazing charts to me. So from 2000 to 2017, so almost 2 decades, North Omaha has seen a total population decline of 3,552 people. A Black population decline of 5,423 people. Now, remember I said that right now there's 35,000 black people in what we consider North Omaha. 5,000 is a healthy chunk of people. The white population actually declined. What increased was the Asian population and the Hispanic population. Now, mind you, Hispanic is an ethnicity, and even though most identify as Mexicans, there could be some black or white Hispanic classification, but it's not that many. So those are pretty stable numbers. So if you look at that dark orange up there, that's the population. This is from Policy Maps. And in fact, you all can go to the Fed website and make your own maps and look at this. This is GIS mapping tool. So this area, and this is going to be on all the charts just for reference. You can't see it in the back of no, but this is 68111. And I use this as the epicenter. So whenever, if you can't see it, this is where it is. So this is the population decline. So at minimum 6.8%, all the way to as much percentage as it can handle. So this is worse, right? The dark is worse. So when you look at this population decline, where is it all centered at? So look at the whole city. You got some out west. You got a lot of growth further out west in different pockets. But by far, the most concentrated population decrease and decline came in what we call North Omaha in those 2 decades. So in 2000, 64% of all black and biracial individuals in Omaha lived in North Omaha. By 2017, this decreased to 49%. Now, Franklin Thompson's in here, right? You're former city councilman. Are you current city councilman?
Department of Human Rights and Relations.
All right, Department of Human Rights and Relations. From a political standpoint, if this was your district and you were traditionally working to get out the vote, and that vote was a specific demographic group that worked on behalf of you, would this not concern you? A drop in almost 15% of one particular race or ethnic group in an area of the city is a huge drop for that period of time. And it has a lot of consequences. The largest decline occurred in 68111, which saw a drop in 6,429 black people during that period. And so at first I was thinking, okay, is this just because they tore down Pleasant View and Logan Fontanelle? Well, Logan Fontanelle, I believe, was torn down in 1995. Pleasant View maybe, but I think they only had like 300 housing units. So it's way more than what got torn down, right? And so this represents 1 out of every 10 of the entire black population left 68111 during that time period. And this is where we're at, by the way, 68111. Historically, 68111 has had the highest percentage of black individuals in the state and still does. However, in 2000, 3 out of 4 individuals in 68111 were black. By 2017, this declined to 6 out of 10. Numerically, that means it dropped from 73% down to 59%. There was a time when in the entire state, I think it was only 68111 and 68110 that had more minorities than majorities. Now with the rise of the Hispanic population, some of our rural communities, you're seeing entire towns that are over 50% Hispanic. This is huge. It has implications. In regard to all of North Omaha, the black population declined from 49% to 45%. Let's talk about population mobility. So this is done in different times. So 2000, 2010, and the 2017 estimates. Again, your darker means more. Now, for those of you who can see this, what are you seeing? Tell me what you're seeing. 68111. Here's the purple. 2010. Here's the purple. 2017. Here's the purple. What are you seeing?
2017 looks like it's more prominent.
Right, we're moving where?
West.
So we're moving out of the traditional black community and we're moving into progressively more western areas of the city. Population change. So I did this, I wanted to compare these two. So this is the population change. Remember, the darker means a decline. And then the purple means population migration. So as the population declined in this area, the population of blacks increased in this area. So what's happening is you're seeing population mobility or displacement occurring and being pushed out into the northwestern area of the city. Population density, I just put this in there because this is important economic development consideration. Like retail counts incomes and household heads, right? So your per capita population is the amount of income that you have per person. So if everybody in here averaged $1, then it would be $1 per capita. This is different than household income. I use this. I like this because ultimately you get a purchasing power. Like if any of you saw me produce the job production ratio, which says how many jobs black people produce versus how many they need, I use per capita income as a measure of this, or one of the other ratios. So here you go. So here's population density. So we were right here. This is where we're at now. Population density, of course, is population decline.
I might have missed it. I'm confused. Did you give the definition of gentrification?
Yes.
Would you give it verbally, please?
Basically, the Cliff Notes version is when poor people are moved out because of the redevelopment and the pricing structure or other issues, and a wealthier population is moved in. So basically, it's about the switch, population switch.
So it's based upon economy.
Pretty much. It's a form of economic powerlessness. Hold on to that, Elijah. We can talk about it more. Homeownership change. Look at the shift in homeownership. Now, part of this is the recession. You know, the recession, if you read the research, it wiped out a lot of black wealth because a lot of black wealth was in homes, and that was one of the significant declines. When you look at this, look at the homeownership in North Omaha. Again, the darker is the greater the decline. And look at what's happening. Greater than anywhere else in the city is the place where black people live. So in 2000, half of all individuals in 68111 and 110 owned their home, with 7 out of 10 in 68104. By 2017, only 4 out of the 10 did so in 68111, and a little more than half did in 68104. So what are the implications of a reduction in home ownership? You have more population instability, right? You have less control of your community because traditionally your landlord has less incentive to maintain and keep up the property unless they think they're going to get a return on investment. All of these different things. So the issues of homeownership decline. Median home values, as you may suspect, with those numbers, the lowest median home values in the nation, or in the state, or in the city. So we're losing housing units in North Omaha as well. So all of North Omaha, we had a gain of 366 in roughly two decades. So basically, we're building probably like 15 net new houses a year in the past 20 years, which is unheard of. But when you look at 68111, they lost 469 units. 68110 gained, and most of the gain, if there was any, went to 68104. So again, the traditional heart of the black community has seen a huge decline in housing units. This is from the land map, or the land bank. So I'll pull this up off their website. So properties in red are land bank properties listed as residential or vacant. Again, North Omaha with portions in South Omaha. Median household income estimate. Again, concentrated lowest in this city. Per capita income, which we talked about before. The city per capita income, meaning the per capita income for everybody in 2017, was $30,000. In 68111, it was $13,000. Right? That's a $17,000 difference, more than half. And 68111 is about the same. 68104 has always been slightly better. Families in poverty. As you can see, this is moving out west. Concentrated in North Omaha, with some migration into South Omaha, the concentrations of poverty. Persistent poverty census tracts. Again, the darker means the higher concentrated. Where is it located at? Median family income as a percentage of area median family income. Again, the light yellow is 50% or less of the median area income. So all of that in context, and I didn't even get to any business numbers because it took a long time to put together and I didn't have time to do those numbers. You got to go to different sources. But when you look at all of those, you see a trend. Historical, pervasive, disinvestment, and poor economic development in communities that were primarily populated by black people. There's no way, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, not the views of the Federal Reserve Bank, that you can look at what has happened in this area of the city and say that it hasn't been intentional, either actively or passive intentionality, or just plain incompetence. Probably a combination of both. But I've traveled to black communities all across the nation and I see this same theme. Kansas City, Kansas, where I spent 5 years doing a grassroots economic development program. Wichita, Kansas. 5 Points, Denver. East of True Street in Kansas City, they're doing a little bit better, but trying to figure out some things, but they're still struggling. You can just start keeping naming them. This started with urban renewal in the 70s, post-segregation into integration, where they said, okay, we will let you be mobile as a population, but now what we're going to do is bisect your community and tear out thousands of homes with which you can do nothing about. This has happened consistently across multiple communities of color. One person told me, he said, hey, Dale, where I came from, when they did their urban renewal strategy in the 70s, they put the highway through the black community and didn't even put an off-ramp. Right? Think about our city. I want you to get on Lake Street, get on the I-75, and go north. What happens? It curves. Where does it curve? The original plan was to have that go all the way up to the logical connector, which I believe is I-80 or whatever, down by Dodge Park. But one group of people who had a voice and maybe a little bit of money said, you shall not pass. What is that? What is the Lord of the Rings saying? You shall not pass. They put their wizard staff down, drew a line in the sand, and where did that interstate turn to? Right? So this has happened progressively. If I had time, I would have showed you the redlining map of North Omaha going back to the 1940s. I can't remember her name from Creighton, but she did an excellent presentation with me at Washburn University.
Paula Strand.
There you go, Paula Strand. And she detailed the redlining of North Omaha. All of these things go into play when you start talking about what is going on today. Gentrification risk factors, low-income population, accessible property either due to it being vacant, dilapidated, significantly lower cost than market average, and high rental ownership rates. Proximity to rapid development that brings amenities, jobs, or new upscale housing. Proximity to downtown. Historical underinvestment in infrastructure and amenities of care. If I would have asked you to raise your hand on all 5 of those, how many of you would have raised your hand on all 5 of those as a potential gentrification signal for our area of the community? And I asked for those of you who didn't raise it, which ones are not happening? So, is North Omaha at risk for gentrification?
It's done already, ain't it, really?
It is my opinion that North Omaha, particularly the southern parts of North Omaha, are significantly at risk for gentrification in the near future. I also believe that North Omaha is currently suffering from outmigration, negative outmigration, or displacement. And that wholesale gentrification, by definition, is not yet occurring. Displacement and gentrification essentially have some of the same consequences for the population. So in many ways, you're just saying, changing the term. If I'm forced out of an area that I want to stay in and I want to be able to have access to amenities, a high quality of life, jobs, business opportunities, and all of the other factors that most Americans want, and I get forced out of that area for whatever reason, whether somebody's coming in or not, the consequences to me and my family are the same. Solutions. These are my solutions. To develop in place, you have to develop the people in place, right? So if I'm trying to build up the economy of an area without creating gentrification, I only have one logical course of action, right? That is to ensure that the population that's there has every opportunity available to build the kind of culture, the economy, and the infrastructure that they need to continue their economic opportunities and growth in the area. You know, and the problem is that most of us look at poor people as a problem versus an opportunity. And most of people use North Omaha synonymous with poverty. And because so many people look at poverty from a, why can't they just pull up themselves by their bootstrap, versus an issue of systemic inequities that have placed one group of people out of the loop of prosperity. Until we change that narrative, it becomes very hard to create strategies that develop in place. This development must increase the economic productivity of the existing population. This is done through full stack of entrepreneurship development and education and high productive skills or vocational opportunity. And it also leverages real estate ownership and development to create economic opportunity and business opportunity for the local community that connects with broader city development. Now, I'm not just talking about out my head. Buddy of mine, Rich Main, West Baltimore. I'm going to get to questions in a second. West Baltimore, Innovation Village, Rich Main. Done something I've never seen in the history of modern America. Now, West Baltimore is where Freddie Gray got killed. Remember earlier I was talking about the riots. So, this is what Rich has done with his team. West Baltimore Transformation. In 2012, organized conversation with racially and economically challenged organizations. Contracted with architects that looked at where the people and real estate assets were. He asked the residents, wow, isn't that novel? That if you want to create a solution for a group of people, that you actually sit down and talk to them and see what they think about a situation. Like, I mean, how can you actually fix something with your technical expert that is from a different community that doesn't understand the people nor their needs? And this is history. Like, I remember one of my first PhD classes, I was reading in public administration about the rise of the technical expert in public administration, where they served as the proxy between the government and the community, and they were these technical experts that supposedly knew exactly how to fix the problems of the communities in which they were expected to serve. My answer is, how is that working for us? Right? So, novelly, Rich actually went out and said, how would residents vision the future economically for this community? Started working on the framework in 2014, interviewed residents about jobs, environment, and entrepreneurs, organized around the innovation pipeline. Formed a 501c3 in 2015. 2016 launched. 90% of the funding model has been joint ventures with private market, which does what? It eliminates philanthropic steering and philanthropy that may not understand the exact needs or how to fund those needs in your community. The approach from that these communities have intrinsic value and that they can create value by creating high quality investable environments that provide returns for different investment communities. Real estate, private capital, venture capital. Their motto, invest in people, train them up, invest in companies that will hire the people and provide real estate that provides living and working opportunities for residents and companies. Find operators that are training and joint venture with them. Partner with software development, coding, entrepreneurial programs, develop Venture Accelerator into West Baltimore, and also trades. And remember I said I started in 2012. To date, created over 150 jobs, responsible for over $200 million in the real estate pipeline. They're still going. I think they might be up to $500 million. Facilitated over $1 million invested in 14 companies. Went from a broad disorganized organization in the community to actively involved community, participated in building, supporting, and benefiting from the pipeline of opportunity. This is happening now, and there was others. What they're doing in Miami, with Cold Fever Miami. What Rodney's doing. Things Lanier Richardson is doing in Newark and start working on in Chicago. You know, there's people that are making actual tangible changes in a period where we historically have not seen them happen at scale. These are happening. One of the things he told me is, he said, we were talking the other day, he said, so Rich, tell me what some of your successes are. He was like, yeah, man, we just got 100 young black kids jobs for $40,000 a year. Wow. Do the math on that. Do the math on that. 100 times 40,000. And in fact, he said, everybody gets hype about all these venture capital investing firms. He said, our largest business that scaled the fastest has been a black female-owned demolition company. We were able to leverage her into these real estate deals, and she more than quadrupled her revenue over the last 3 years because of it. Questions?
What is the medium age and the medium income of that remaining 35,000?
The median household income, I don't know the age, I didn't check that. But we tend to be younger, especially because a lot of these, we just tend to be younger. We have a higher birth rate. But I didn't really look at that. So, I don't know. I have it on my data. I don't have it on my chart. But this shows, I don't know. It's somewhere around there, Elijah. I got the per capita there.
Wouldn't those two demographics alone affect what I'm assuming your solving the problem is? If the age demographic of that 35 is older, and I believe 3 years ago it was identified at somewhere between 52 and 57
on average.
Average?
No. Not even close. I mean, that's even the oldest rural populations are capping out at like 47 average. And traditionally, black and minority populations tend to have lower age averages because we tend to have bigger families with more kids.
Based on that same close variable number of 35,000 that is being disseminated because of a younger population moving out?
Well, your per capita income is based upon the average amount that each person. So if you took the average amount of income out of the whole population and divided by the population, that's what you're getting here. Household income is a little bit more tricky because depending on your household structure, you're going to have different averages of household income.
Right.
So if I have a single mother with 2 kids, and that's the source of the household income, that's different than if I have a 2-family, household which has 2 incomes. So that's why I like to use per capita, because to me, it gives you a better view of what the actual economic productivity of the group is. And to me, that's what I'm talking about. So if I'm a real estate developer or retail developer, I want to see the aggregate purchasing power of a group before I make a decision to come. There's a reason why North Omaha has a Walmart and a Dollar General, and that we're selling, Sonny Gerber cars and not new Jaguars, right? Because they're selling businesses to the market that they're in. Now, where age does come into play, but not enough to affect the differences, is because when you have a younger population, they have less earning. So, but that's not enough to, say that there's a $17,000 difference in per capita income. So there's much more going on there, which is workforce, systemic equities, in my opinion, not enough focus on entrepreneurship, business creation.
Hi, how are you?
What connection can you draw from the lack of understanding of personal finance and the implementation of business entrepreneurship with a resolve of using cooperative economic structures?
So he asked, what is the connection between, personal financial literacy, basically, understanding entrepreneurship and cooperative economics? It depends on how you look at it. I mean, from my lens, I'm going to say everything. Because fundamentally, if you heard me talk about economics is fundamentally about survival. That's how you survive. It's the social science. People think it's about numbers, but no, it's how people organize to allocate and control resources to protect themselves and also live and thrive. So the primary way that you do that, like when you look at it, and I didn't bring the data on here, but I talked about it before, the entrepreneurship capacity to date of the black community in America, and especially in North Omaha, is very, very anemic, right? And there's a reason for this, I feel. Like when we, and this is totally my opinion, when segregation occurred, there was one researcher that said this was the largest opening of a domestic market, integration, the largest opening of a domestic market in the history of America. So basically what white businesses came in and did was they did the Walmart effect. So the Walmart effect, when a Walmart comes into a rural community, is because they can outcompete all of these other things, they shut down all of the other businesses because it's very difficult for them to compete unless it's a very rich market. This happened to the black community. Plus we pushed to go into the labor market. And then you have black flight because you have black people that were leaving historically black communities because or whatever for the first time they could, and one of the things we don't even talk about is the fact that blacks are heavily overrepresented in government jobs. So what a lot of black people did was they said, well, entrepreneurship is a risky venture. I want to be stable, and I perceive stability as being in the workforce. That's why you see more going into government jobs, which were earlier, more discriminatory barriers. We're still like that. But the problem is that it may be less risky for one person, but it becomes more risky for the entire community. The job production ratio I was telling you about. By my calculations, black people produce about 1 job for every 11 they need. And Asians produce 1 job for every 1.25 they need. Whites produce 1 job for every 1.25 they need. Put this in perspective. White businesses generate $2 for every $1 of purchasing power they have. Black businesses generate 25 cents for every $1 purchasing power the black community has. So if you can't control fundamentally a few things, or at least be emerging in a few things, then you're always going to have problems in a capital society. I don't care if you're white, black, green, or other. If you can't control your factors of production, real estate, capital, labor, you're always going to have problems, especially if you can't control your space. So when you see the lack of ownership in any given community, any given black community, they're always going to be a risk. It's always going to be a risk factor. So that's why I keep talking about economic productivity. Because people say, well, Dale, you're just saying, well, we need to make money. No. Economic productivity is power. And what we're really talking about is power. Gentrification, whether it occurs with a black race, a Hispanic race, or whatever race, is about one group with power being able to overrun a group with less power. So one of the definitions of power is the ability to resist those that will compel you to do something against your will. Now, if I tell you displacement is about people moving out even when they don't want to, what does that tell you from the context of power? We don't have it, right? So if all of those black people that moved out of North Omaha did not want to move, or were made so uncomfortable that they felt they had to move, that means what? They didn't have what?
Power.
And if they didn't have power and could be compelled, then who had the power to make them do so? Somebody else. This is a discussion for another day. So, to put a nice little bow on that, to me, the fundamental thing that we need to do is go back to your core work boot type of development. How do we build more black entrepreneurs across the entire spectrum, from your mom and pop, big mamas, to your scalable venture capital? How do we control more assets and make them productive in our own communities? And how do we train our current upcoming generation in the jobs of the future that would generate the highest rate of return on investment? Let me turn this off real quick. I love prayer walks. I love prayer walks, right? I know former Councilman Franklin is a man of the Lord. So we love prayer walks, right?
Speak for yourself.
But if you could take that same prayer walk and walk to Big Mama's, to walk to No Look Fashion, and maybe take a little bit of that money and buy something at each stop along the way, now you're giving both unto the Lord and unto Caesar. And I think that will help a little bit better. The back, sir.
I am a community activist, which I work with young teenagers and grown men and women. I own Blessed Automotive. I started that it's been 13 years ago, working in community so people can afford to get their cars fixed. So I charge people what they can afford to pay. And that was one thing I started. Then I started at Chef Jones on the internet, where I'm reaching 396,000 views right now. One thing I learned in business, because I started my own business, you talking to a person that was homeless, sleeping at Carter Lake. From that, I'll boost myself back up. I went to send myself to college. Then I sent myself, I got help. I had mentors. And one thing about mentors and things, why our community is broke down? Because every block you see beside the church, you see a liquor store. Okay? Yeah. That's one thing that's bad. Then you got all these buildings that nobody's using, like the OCI building on 24th Street, that could be reduced, recycled. recycle. You understand me? You got to energize, motivate the younger from the age of 13 all the way to the age of 21. That's our younger groups right now that's in trouble. That keeps our poverty down. Or the drunks is coming from where? The liquor stores. You feel me? Our kids see that on the way on the school buses. They see it everywhere. One thing we got to do is, I've been hiring, I'll see some people with the sign, I'm hungry today, oh, can you help me? I said, get in the car with me right now, I got something for you to do today. No, I'm not going to give you no free money. I don't bless out of You're going to take a tire off, you're going to learn how to do a cleanup, you're going to do a break. I'm going to give you $25, I'm going to give you $50 just for showing up, even if you don't take the tire off, but you take the knitting. I have hired just myself, and out of my own pocket. I have hired whoever I can, and God bless me to hire them. My mission is, there is a whole, I worked.
I'm going to cut you off right there because we're really short on time.
Sorry.
But I do want to speak to that. And for those of you who have to leave, because we are at the time, feel free, and I'll stick around and answer more questions. But to your point, I agree with you. So when you see such a level of distressed property, you have to ask yourself why. Like, it makes no rational sense. So, I tell people, like everybody says, well, look at what they're doing in South Omaha. Why can't that happen on 24th Street? I'm like, the physical infrastructure of South Omaha is significantly different. The built environment is different than North Omaha. Now, where I will point to your North Omaha 24th Street corridor, and many of you heard me say this before. Now, how many of you get your hair cut from a barber on a regular? I don't anymore. I don't have any hair, so I just cut it off, right? So how many of you would go to a barber that was blonde and expect a fresh haircut? You? Nice, bro.
That's all right.
What they've done to 24th Street, from Cummings to Ames, and we can even go further, looks like a blind barber cut somebody's hair. There's no logical economic development reason for it to be developed as it is. Now I'm going to speak on something else, and I promised myself I wasn't, but I'm breaking that promise. When your largest real estate developers are nonprofit organizations, you have a fundamental problem with your local economy. Now we can point to right now. All right, I'm not going to say that. So, anyway, you get my point. So, my question is, I'm a relentless optimist. I believe all people, but I specifically believe black people have so much untapped potential. Victor Huang, who runs Kauffman Foundation's entrepreneurship, said diverse entrepreneurs are not underserved, they're under-optimized. So, if we have tremendous potential for entrepreneurship, but yet we're steered down pathways that are taking us out of that, the entire United States economy has lost out. It's not just that black community, it's the entire economy. Because if you have $1 million business in you, but you get steered down to, like Malcolm X said, he said, they keep steering me into carpentry because they said that's the career of a good N-word, right? So if you keep getting steered down to things that don't maximize your potential and your talent, you're dragging the whole economy down. But that is what has happened in our community, from our educational structures, from our development policies, from our workforce policies, all of these things. And all you have to do is look at the numbers. Rational people will look at a situation and see how we got here and then say, how is that working for us? Because the Chinese definition of insanity is what? So how crazy are we? Then I'm not that.
Okay.
Last two questions.
Okay. My question would be basically, since we have seen the decline of black people, and during the time when we had the interstate shortcoming, how do we revitalize North Omaha, where it can be vital again in every situation, and also help the people get their jobs and development back in?
I say entrepreneurship ecosystem building. We start from the premise of ownership and control. We need to focus more on creating the creators of jobs versus creating consumers of jobs. Because if you create creators of jobs, which entrepreneurship is, then you feed consumers of jobs. So right now, most of our energy, time, and money goes into trying to figure out how to get the next black, brown, or low-income person a job. versus saying, how do I create the next black, brown, or purple person, whatever, that can create 100 jobs? So it becomes an issue of supply and demand. That's why I'm not a big guy on buy black campaigns, because I've always argued that if you build black, buy black becomes organic and natural. So if I build more black firms and create more black business density and more black quality entrepreneurs, they're going to figure out the market, because that's what an entrepreneur does. So a good entrepreneur, one of the things people said is, the founder of LinkedIn said, an entrepreneur is somebody who jumps out the airplane and builds the parachute on the way down. Harvard definition is somebody that pursues an opportunity without resources currently controlled. Black people have always been entrepreneurial and always have been innovative. What we have not had is a system of support, capital, mentoring, and access that other groups have that are making it good. So those are the things. You start by controlling and owning, and everything else becomes an extension of that process. Elijah, then we got to get out of here.
All right. First of all, I want to thank Brother Hamilton and you for doing this presentation, because as far as we're concerned, this is probably the most important subject. I think my basic difficulty has always been in definition. I look at gentrification by the so-called aristocracy controlling our development from 1913 up to today. So what definition do we use to identify this genocide?
Displacement. Because it's not gentrification unless the population is replaced with the upper class. So now if you want to say that it's a long-term, this is a technical definition. I'm not even debating.
I understand that, but when you give those individuals who are moving in a line of credit, whether they come in over here on a ship or they come in over the wall or do whatever, when you give them a line of credit based on them never having any credit, and the people that reside in that area don't get no credit because they have bad credit because of the situation in the past. Right. I need another judge. I'm using genocide. Yeah. All right. In order, I would like for you to give a definition of what our situation is.
Displacement. I mean,
displacement can be when you displace means you can be taken out. That's genocide.
Well, I mean, how do you want to define that?
All right, I'm good right there. Thank you.
If they want to accept the definition,
all right,
that's
great.
fine.
Okay.
I mean, but what I will say that I 100% agree with is that we have very structural problems that reinforce inequities across different races, with the black, population in the United States, and especially Omaha, being one that faces the highest level of barriers, to upward mobility. I mean, that's a very political definition. Like, when I announced my run for president, I'm not going to say I smoke weed like Kamala Harris, and I'm not going to say we need grace and forgiveness like Booker. I'm not going to call myself Native American, even though I'm 1/16 Native American like Elizabeth Warren. And I'm not going to do some other things some other folks are doing. When I announce it, I'm going to say, look, we need to give black people some money for real. And let's start there, and we can reverse engineer from the rest of that. And then we also have to figure out how true diversity and inclusion happens. So in a guide that we're going to release, what we say is that you're truly inclusive, not just when you have access as a diverse person or female to the same level of information, knowledge, opportunity, and resources, but it's truly inclusive when those same groups that have been left out actually control the flow of information, the distribution of resources, and all of those other variable factors. So we do inclusion and diversity very superficial in the nation now. If we really get to where we want to be, diverse people control, relative to their percentage, every aspect of the system as well. Last question for sure, and then I got to get out.
Would you be willing to talk about the role of banks in small business funding in this situation?
Small business funding is very difficult, and we get confused. Like half of all businesses never use any kind of bank funding. They go to friends, family, and friends, right? The difference is when you have a wealth gap, that becomes much more challenging. So when blacks have 22 times less wealth than whites, and we all go 50% to get funding, then that means I'm probably getting $1 from my mama, and they're getting like 100,000, right? So the ratio is off. But that's how it's structured. So now banks from a legal perspective and a regulatory perspective, can only lend in a certain way. So we keep saying, well, if you have this, that, or the other, then it will be different. But banks are regulated. So banks lend what they do. They're cash flow based lenders. They're risk averse. But that's why we need to look at alternative forms of funding that can then supplement that. We maybe need to do more SBA type guarantees, more strategic programs like that are in place, more innovative and flexible credit decision making, maybe from different organizations, not just microfinance. So look at the whole stack of what an entrepreneur needs based upon the type of businesses that they have. Because small business funding can be very challenging for every business, not just minority diverse businesses. So, and these are questions of consideration. We have to figure out the most effective solution to get to the result that we want, both in banking and in other areas. That's all I got for you today. Thanks for sticking around a little bit longer. If you have any additional questions, I'll hang around for a little bit. We can talk.